Cursed land, haunted forest. This is a true story, and I've been kind of obsessing over what happened out there. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible without leaving out key details. My wife's uncle, Jay, bought some land just north of Spokane, Washington, with a friend of the family, Kay. They got it at a significant discount because a nearby aluminum smelter had polluted the ground, and it was impossible to use the water beneath the ground. They had set up 2 plots, each with a camper to live in. Jay had been progressively getting paranoid and saying people were stalking him and watching him in the trees. About 3 months into living there, a man wandering through the woods had an interaction with Jay and ended up attacking him and breaking his jaw. Upon being arrested, the man said he was overcome with a desire to see if he could kill him with a single punch. 2 months later, Jay was murdered in his sleep on the couch in his camper. Kay found him and immediately ran as far away as he could until he stopped to call the police. There was sufficient evidence of who did it, and they quickly caught the killer, who was a 19-year-old boy who said he simply wanted his bike. He beat him to death with a power tool that was lying on the floor nearby, completely bashing his brains in. There were at least 250 crows covering the dirt road up to the property. I didn't sleep at all the first night. I stared into the forest, searching for the cause of my intense fear. The energy of this place was so uncomfortable, and I assumed it was simply because Uncle Jay was killed here. Even though the days were eerie, I never had a moment where I didn't feel watched. My wife and I always had a sense of fear, especially after dark. Things sort of normalized for a while, until one day Kay began puking and feeling very lightheaded all the time. I took him to the hospital, and they said he was fine, probably with the flu. At this point, it was the anniversary of Jay's murder. 3 days after the date of Jay's death, Kay comes running out of his camper. She comes running out of his camper screaming, "I can't breathe," waking my wife and me up, and we run out to see what's wrong. Kay had gotten into his car and floored it, sending it crashing into a nearby tree. I run up and peer through the window to see the most intense and primal fear I've ever seen in someone's eyes. He was gasping and clutching his chest. Moments later, he breathed out one last time and he was dead. We gave him KR for 30 minutes until the ambulance arrived. On July 10th, 1 year and 3 days after moving there with G, they were both dead. Now it's only me and the wife alone on the property. Every moment living in fear and not understanding what had happened here. I don't know why we didn't leave right away. One day I came out to get fresh water from a drum. We kept for water and smelled the worst smell I'd ever smelled. The water container had a 1-inch opening on top, and inside the water were bits and pieces of chipmunks, like spines and heads. They didn't fall in. Something ripped them apart before putting them inside. The nights were getting worse and worse. I never saw anything. I was just always filled with unease and intense fear. I grew up deep in the mountains of North Idaho, with the nearest town being 30 miles away. Fear in the woods, even at night, is new for me. Hearing crashing and footsteps every night. One night my wife and I returned home to the worst feeling I've ever felt. Everything looked different, and although everything was right where we left it, nothing seemed to be in place. Looking around, I suddenly see this orange, long-haired, manged cat sitting on a stump. This cat's eyes were so intense, fiery, almost glowing, but not quite. We start hearing branches snapping and pine needles crunching, seemingly from every direction. I'm still staring at this cat, almost frozen in fear. I tell her to get into the truck, and I'll grab the spotlights. We aren't going on foot. We roll the windows down and shine my intensely bright LED lights throughout the forest. We slowly creep down the road, yelling back. As we get further down the road, the voice strikes out. "Please, won't anyone help?" Sounds are difficult to pin down in the woods, but this one was very close. I called the police when I hit the highway, and afterwards they said there was no one around. I picked up our stuff the next day, and my wife gave birth the following day. We never stayed there again after the baby was born. What the hell could do these things? I never even believed in paranormal things before, but I don't know what else happened. So I'm crying as I type this, because what I just saw has got to be the single scariest thing that I've ever witnessed, and is the reason I'm moving out of the rural part of my state the first chance I get. So, for some quick background, I live in rural Illinois and am a bit of a night owl, so I frequently smoke in my garage late at night. Since I live in the country, I'm used to hearing noises around me like weird scratching and rubbing noises, which I assume are just the rats and mice and stuff that come with living on a farm. Anyway, I usually act like a big chicken when it comes to walking back inside after these smokes at night, despite the fact that I'm very familiar with my yard and the area around it, and always end up sprinting back to the side door and slamming it behind me without looking back. Tonight, I look back. High and assuming that I was just being afraid of the dark, I looked around for about 15 to 20 seconds, which wound up being a mistake because I did see something. Out of the corner of my eye, peeking around the side of the garage that I had just walked from, stood the undeniable half silhouette of a person shrouded in darkness. Now, this sight alone was enough to make the tears in my eyes start flowing, and for me to fully spit my pants. But it got worse. In the shock of seeing someone I was literally just walking away from with my back turned, I stood there for a moment with a horrified look on my face, trying to blink away the tears, and hopefully the sight before me. The thing I saw must have recognized that I saw it, because it was the single worst thing I've ever witnessed. He took one step out past the corner of the garage and into the light of the side porch. Intentionally, I now think, because it wanted me to see its face. Standing there was a perfect replica of my father. But under the circumstances, I didn't consider it to actually be him for a second, because I knew for a fact that he was sleeping inside the house. And what happened next definitely solidified that, because in the 10-second span, I had to process what I was seeing. He, the imposter, sideways walked out into the light and just stared right at me, harder than I've ever been stared at in my entire life. When I say sideways walked, I don't mean like a karaoke stretch or a turn run and then turn back toward me. It was as if the entire lower half of him shifted sideways, while the upper portion of him stared perfectly and inhumanly still, and focused on me. I didn't hesitate after that to sprint inside, shut off the light, and lock the door. I've been trying to convince myself that my mind is playing tricks on me for the last half hour in my room, except for the fact that I can distinctly hear something moving back and forth outside my window. I'm currently scared shitless in my bed under the covers, trying to make it through the night and telling myself that it's weed hallucinations, like they claim can happen. The absolute worst part is the fact that I can hear it testing out voices, trying to replicate my father's. It's hard to describe exactly what about it. It's so terrifying, but it's like hearing a bear or a moose speak English, but with a lack of human vocal cords. The closest thing I can compare it to are those videos of people teaching their cats to talk. It's out there, pacing and practicing the phrase over and over. Son, it's me. Can you give me a hand? Son, it's me. Can you give me a hand? Sometimes more angry and booming. Sometimes softly. The most chilling part that will be the reason I don't sleep tonight is the fact that I just heard it say, I know you're still awake. It seemed like the perfect summer job. A small hotel a few miles out of town is in need of a few junior staff members to help keep things running during the tourist season. It seemed like exactly what I needed, but I could never have predicted what happened within the walls of that hotel. On my first day, I was paired with an older woman, Kelly, who oversaw the hotel management. She gave me a walkthrough of everything that I had to do, along with several rules and instructions that I had to abide by. It started as a very standard list. Stay out of the way of the guests. Keep your uniform clean and tidy. Normal things. Then came the final and most important rule. Kelly seemed to lean in closer to me, her voice almost at a whisper. "There's just one more rule," she told me. "Do not, under any circumstances, ever go into room 13. Of course, I had a million questions about this strange rule. I had walked past the door to room 13 several times on my tour of the hotel, and it looked exactly like all of the other doors. "What's so special about room 13? I asked Kelly. Curious. She shook her head. "It's a rule that comes from the hotel owner," Kelly explained. "No one is allowed in there, not even me. It's kept locked at all times. And that's all I know about it." I accepted that response and thought nothing more of it. Perhaps the hotel owner had his own reasons for keeping the room locked. There was no reason to believe that anything was going on in there. Of course, I later came to realize that I should have seen red flags much sooner. It had been a few weeks of working at the hotel without problems. Everything had gone smoothly, and I had basically forgotten all about the bizarre rule of room 13. I had become familiar with and friendly with my fellow members of staff. I was particularly close with Mark, one of the waiters, or Elizabeth, a housekeeper. I often found myself working closely with Catherine, a junior staff member like myself. Everything was going well until one night. I was getting ready to go home one evening after my shift had ended when Kelly approached me. She explained that her night shift manager had called in sick and asked if I would do her a favor and stay on for overtime. I agreed, and the first hours of the night shift went smoothly. It was only after all of the guests had retired to their hotel rooms and gone to sleep that I finally started to notice something extremely odd. I was walking through the hallways of the hotel when I passed room 13. I thought nothing of it until I heard a small noise, almost like a scratching sound coming from inside the room. It made me stop in my tracks, and my instincts wanted to open the door and see what was going on. But I remembered the rule. Do not go into room 13. Whatever these strange noises were, I would have to ignore them. About an hour later, I was checking my emails in the hotel office when I heard a loud crash. Thinking that someone was in danger, I rushed up to where I'd heard the noise, taking myself all the way up to where I was. Once again, standing outside the door of room 13. I could have sworn that I heard the sound coming from in there, but that couldn't be possible. Knowing that I was not allowed to enter room 13, I turned around to walk away. Suddenly, I heard another loud crash. It was undeniable that it had come from room 13. I couldn't ignore all of these strange sounds coming from the room. I had always been taught to act on instinct, and all of my instincts told me that there was something very, very, very wrong with room 13. Whatever or whoever was in there. It was giving me a very strange feeling. I don't quite know what came over me, but I suddenly started to press on the handle of the door, trying to force it open. I was well aware that trying to enter room 13 against the rules could cost me my job, but I couldn't ignore the noises coming from the room. Something could really go wrong, and I didn't want to take that risk. The door was locked, but it was not impossible to force it open. It took a lot of strength. But eventually, the door opened a crack, and then I was able to pull it open enough for me to be able to carefully slip into the room. The first thing that I noticed was that the room was pitch black inside. I tried to adjust my eyes, but I couldn't see a thing. It was like stepping into a complete void of darkness. I knew where the light switch should have been, so I felt all the way up the wall for it, but there was no switch. I tried to take a step forward into the room, but as I stepped, my foot hit something. It was solid enough to make me lose my balance slightly. Slowly, I bent down to touch whatever this thing was. As soon as I put my hand on it, I could feel that there was something very strange going on. It almost felt like a leg, almost like that of a person, but that couldn't be possible. I reached out behind me, but all I could feel was another leg, seemingly coming from another body. I reached out again, only to feel another. An arm this time, then a torso, and another leg. It was endless. I felt as though I was surrounded, except there was something odd about these arms and legs. They just didn't feel quite alive. I immediately felt sick. There was no way, absolutely no way, that I could be standing in the middle of a room full of bodies, but it all made sense. The strange rule about not stepping foot in room 13, of course. It all made sense. This was where the bodies were hidden. I didn't want to believe it, but there seemed to be no other explanation. I felt completely sickened, my head spinning, a shiver running up my spine. There was no way. I'd never even seen a dead body before, let alone been surrounded by them in a pitch. Black hotel room. Was this what happened to people who entered room 13? I put a hand on the wall to steady myself, and I suddenly felt the light switch. Feeling relieved by that, I quickly turned it on and watched light flood the room. This was it. I was mentally preparing myself for the sight of possibly over 20 dead bodies. A sight that would surely make me sick. However, when the light turned on, I was not met with the horrifying sight of countless murder scenes. Instead, all lined up around the room, some perfectly propped up and others sprawled on the floor, were human-sized, doll-like figures. They looked just like humans, almost human, except for one eerie difference. They didn't have eyes, just black, void, like holes where eyes should have been. Their necks were oddly floppy too, drooping to the side. What was most horrifying about these life-size dolls was that they almost exactly resembled all of the hotel staff members that I had become so familiar with. I saw the doll version of Kelly with her head falling into her lap. I saw Mark, the waiter with huge black holes where his eyes should have been. I saw Elizabeth, who was sprawled on the floor with her legs sticking out. I even saw Catherine propped up against the wall, like she was in a child's dollhouse. I wanted to scream, run away, or do anything. This was somehow worse than seeing the disgusting sight of bodies. This was 10 times creepier and made me feel goosebumps up my arms. I wanted to drive away from the hotel and the town and never look back. The one thing that still stuck in my mind was the fact that every single staff member had a doll here, even the newest hires. Everyone had a lifelike, floppy doll looking like an eyeless corpse. The only doll that was missing, and the only member of staff that didn't have a matching doll, was me. There was no doll in room 13 that resembled me. Somehow, that fact was far more chilling. I was about to take my phone out of my pocket to take photos, call the police, or do anything about this terrifying situation when, all of a sudden, the room went black. Pitch black. I tried to move again, but I couldn't. My legs would not stand up and run, and my arms would not reach out to steady myself. I couldn't move. I was fixed. I was stuck. I was trapped. Just then, I felt someone holding my shoulders, propping me up against the wall. I wanted to scream or see who it was, but it felt like I was trapped inside my own body. I was completely unable to move. The hands extended my arms and legs, and I even felt the hands around my neck, making it flop forward ever so slightly, just as it had done on the dolls. That was when I realized it. The dolls inside room 13 were not life, like copies of the hotel staff members. They were the hotel staff members, and I was about to meet the very same fate in room 13, if only I had just listened.